Hi, I'm Julie Carville, and I want to share my love of wildflowers with you today. And I'm delighted to be invited by the Sierra Club to come do this. There's a quote I love from John Muir. He called our Sierra Mountains the most divinely beautiful of all the mountain chains he had ever seen. We live in an area here at Tahoe with incredibly beautiful wildflower meadows. I'm going to take you into that beauty that John Muir was talking about. And we're going to walk along the trails together. I'm going to talk about the flowers, the pollinators, how they interact with the flowers. We'll talk about the birds and the different animals that interact with them. We'll have fun. The first hike that we're going to go on is the Basin and Castle Peak Trail. It's a 6-mile loop which heads north off Interstate 80 at Donner Pass. And the location of the garden that you just saw in the previous picture are the red letters that are along that ridge line. The ridge line goes from Castle Peak to Basin Peak. And along that ridge line that you see are incredible alpine flowers that carpet the ground. Here's one of the flowers that you'll see along that ridge line in rocky areas. They're cute little butterballs, is their name. They grow in 4-inch tall stems. They stay low to the ground for protection from the wind. Butterballs lack petals, so what you're seeing here are actually red sepals. They started out with white sepals, and you can see they've turned red. A sepal is the part of a flower that holds the flower before it opens in bud, and oftentimes that's green. They have no petals, they only have sepals that are colored. So what you're seeing is a cluster of sepals, and they age to red after they've been pollinated. You'll also find the Mariposa Lilies with their yellow nectaries, and that's where the nectar is produced. The black spots in the center highlight the nectar's location to guide bees deep into the flower and past the anthers. That way they ensure pollination by the bees touching the anthers first because they've carried pollen from another Mariposa lily. Then they go in past the anthers, and then they go down deep in to get the nectar, and the flower is pollinated. And then the bee leaves the flower and flies to another flower of the same species. The Mariposa lily flowers are really, really widespread in California, and the Native Americans ate their seeds and gathered the bulbs too. Don't ever try to gather a bulb. Some are toxic, so unless you know what you're doing, you don't want to gather a bulb and eat it. One of the cutest little flowers in this area, dry areas, is the pink star onion, with leaves that often form a romantic heart as they embrace the clusters of the pink flowers. Gently squeeze their leaves, and you'll inhale the onion fragrance. The onion bulbs, leaves, and flowers were also consumed by Native Americans. Whitney's Locoweed produces 1-inch long seed pods that you see bulging out from the leaves right there. They lounge on rocky soils with soft, hairy leaves. They bloom with purple or white flowers. The hairy leaves reduce the evaporation in this dry environment. It slows down the wind, the breezes blowing across the leaves. And the whiteness of the hair also reflects intense sunlight. So this is one way they adapt to this type of a dry location. This plant is named Locoweed for its seed pods. These plants contain a toxic substance that causes crazy reactions in animals. They'll be disoriented, they'll run around, and after seeing that happen, people named the flowers after them because loco, of course, is Spanish for crazy. So it's the Locoweed. They're also called rattleweed because the seeds inside the pods, when they get really dry, they'll rattle in the wind. Sierra Primrose is one of my favorites and probably just about everybody's favorite. It grows along the trail in forested area or in rocky areas in full sun. Notice the little yellow circle in the center. That's like a little bullseye for pollinators. It entices them into the center of the flower, so they'll pass the anthers, gather the pollen, and then pollinate the flower. And I think those little tiny anthers that are peeking out of the flower, to me they say, "Come on in, I've been waiting for you. Where have you been?" At the edge of the ridgeline, as you begin the ascent up to the top of Basin Peak. Now, in the first slide you saw, Basin Peak was the mountain on the left. Castle Peak was on the right. So now we're moving from Castle Peak across the ridgeline over to Basin Peak. And as you go towards the top of Basin Peak, you'll find these 4 to 5 foot tall snowberry shrubs with their small bell-shaped flowers. It's named for the white snowberries, which are toxic for humans, but they are consumed by quail, robins, and other birds. As you head up towards the top of Basin Peak, you'll go through this incredibly beautiful garden, fragrant flowers of mule's ears and purple-spurred lupin. And when you reach the level top, you can sit and enjoy distant vistas in the sweet mountain air because you're about 9,000 feet at this point. After heading down off Basin Peak, you'll reach this meadow called Round Valley, where you can look back at Basin Peak and the ridgeline that you just walked across. If you look in the back of the photo, you can see the left-hand side of the ridgeline and Basin Peak. This meadow bloomed here in July last year with these soft yellow arnicas. Native Americans applied the leaves to bruises and sprains, as do the herbalists now. This causes the blood vessels at the injury to expand and bring more blood to heal the injury. This meadow is a wonderful place to linger for hours, especially if you're with little children. And you'll want to also visit the Sierra Club hut, which is there up in the upper right, which can be reserved by the Sierra Club for overnights. We're in a wet meadow now, and one of the sweetest flowers you'll see in that meadow is the Primrose monkey flower. The stem is only about 4 to 6 inches tall. One time, as I bent down to look closely at the dew on its leaves, I discovered something really exciting. The sunlight was shining at just the right angle through each of those dewdrops to create a prism of tiny rainbows. Sharing stories about the flowers is really a fun way to learn about them. Every plant has a story, just like every person has a story. This plant's story is about its beauty. This is called Lemon's Paintbrush, and it's named after John and Sarah Lemon, who botanized in the western states in the late 1800s. Sarah fell in love with California poppies and ended up writing the bill that passed in 1903 to make the California poppy our state flower. Over the years, the Lemons developed a huge herbarium in their home, which they later donated to UC Berkeley, which became the Jeffson Herbarium. As we leave Round Meadow, our next hike is a 5-mile trail also. It begins at 7,120 feet off Interstate 80 at Donner Summit and heads down south to climb up 8,000-foot Donner Peak, and then later 8,200-foot Mount Judah. The trail begins in a shaded sunlight fairy garden of alpine lilies, crimson columbines, and thimbleberries, which produce red sweet fruits that are a treat to eat. You can gather those in late August. In rocky switchbacks along the trail, you'll find the fragrant flowers of spreading phlox. Get down on your hands and knees to inhale their sweet fragrance, and you'll see tiny golden anthers peeking out of the flower's center, inviting pollinators in. Also along the switchbacks, you'll pass hillsides of low huckleberry oak shrubs. You'll also pass Jeffrey pines, which have been in this picture. You can see they've been pruned by fierce winds during the winter storms. Cassiopeia rises in the background. After wandering through other gardens of wildflowers, you'll see Donner Peak and can take the easy walk up to the spot at the top of the peak to look down in Donner Lake below. After returning to the trail, one of the prettiest flowers will be rock fringe, carpeting sunny, moist areas. Notice its fuzzy 4-lobed stigma, or female part. It's been dusted by yellow pollen by a bee from another rock fringe that has flown in to pollinate it. When you reach the top of 8,200-foot Mount Judah, you'll find sulfur buckwheat and many other low-growing wildflowers. After a snack and enjoying the far vistas from the top, you'll head down the trail through lush flower gardens and reach a junction with the west side of the Loop Trail. As you head past that beautiful open sunny garden, you'll head into the trees, into the red fir forest, where you'll find vivid red snow plants. And since snow plants lack green leaves, they can't photosynthesize to produce their own food. But an amazing compatible relationship exists between red firs, soil fungi, and snow plants. The firs photosynthesize in their green leaves and pass nutrients off to the soil fungi, who penetrate the fir roots. And the fungi penetrate the roots of the snow plants to provide them with the nutrients that the snow plant needs. These amazing, complex community relationships exist everywhere in soil environments. You'll also find coral root orchids in the red fir forest. Like the snow plants, they lack green leaves and are sustained by soil fungi. After leaving the forest, you'll pass hillsides with creeks that go across the trail and under creekside shrubs, where you'll find bishop cap with its tiny 1/4 inch fringe-petaled flowers. They're those cute little lemony-colored flowers that rise out of that big, wide, fuzzy leaf. And if you're here in late fall, in the afternoon, you're here for a real treat. Because the aspens and other plants will be growing and glowing, backlit from the late afternoon sunlight as you walk down the boulder-strewn trail to return to your car. Our next hike is on the Mount Rose Trail off Highway 431 at North Tahoe. It begins at 8,911 feet and ends at the top of 10,788-foot Mount Rose. In dry habitats, you'll pass sulfur flowers, as you see in this picture, and many other flowers, and then you'll enter a forested area where you may hear the chickadees singing their sweet mountain songs as they flit from tree to tree, splitting the lodgepole pine needles to eat the tiny larvae of needle miner moths. They like almonds too, as you can see in this picture, if they're served by a human hand. Chickadees are one of the few birds that remain in the forest throughout winter. It's amazing they're able to do that. Tom Brown once asked his Apache teacher, Stalking Wolf, to name his favorite animal. Instead of choosing a soaring eagle or a powerful bear, Stalking Wolf chose the chickadee because, as he said, it's cheerful like a ray of sunshine in the darkest of storms and can be a powerful symbol for us to radiate our strengths, even when the moment may seem bleak. When you reach Galena Falls, in 1.5 miles from the trailhead, you'll have a nice place in sandy beaches to picnic before continuing up the summit to Mount Rose. If you're coming here with young children, this can be your destination. They can play in the creek. They can chat with the little ground squirrels that come out and the chipmunks. So it's a wonderful place and a short hike, pretty level hike for young children to that point. Nearby, you'll find a wet meadow with shooting stars, elephant heads, and alpine gentians. The green spots on the gentian petals entice insects into the flower as they seek the nectar. In doing so, they pass back by those creamy-colored clusters of pollen that you see in the center of the photo. They pick up pollen on their bodies to carry to another alpine gentian. White bark pines are left behind as the trail rises above the tree line, and you'll enter the world of a true 10,000-foot alpine habitat. As you approach this rocky summit, it can be warm and still. It's really beautiful up there. This is a 2 to 6 inch tall cut-leaf fleabane that hunkers down in the rocks. See how it's snuggled in there with the rocks, really protecting them from the wind. John Muir spoke of alpine plants as gentle mountaineers, face to face with the sky, kept safe and warm by 1,000 miracles, seeming always the finer and the purer, the wilder and stormier their homes. Most alpine plants have adapted to their harsh habitats of little water, fierce winds, and intense sunlight by growing compact leafy perennials with insulating leaves. Perennials, when the winter comes, the roots or the bulbs stay in the ground. The top part of the plant dies off. But when spring comes, they bounce out much quicker than annual flowers. So when there is such a short period of warmth and sun, perennial plants are more adapted to these high elevation areas. This cushion phlox that you see here is so compact that it's impossible for you to push your finger through those leaves. It's so dense. This helps the phlox retain precious heat during cold nights. Botanists have found that the inside of these dense leafy mats can be 20 degrees warmer than the outside air. And that's why the leaves are so densely compact. Comb draba also lives tucked in the rocks here, growing only a few inches tall. This is the only place at Tahoe where I've ever seen this dainty little cheery plant. But the 4 to 12 inch tall Alpine gold doesn't hunker down like little comb draba does. It shows off 2.5 inch wide flowers like a neon light for bees. And it lives here with bold determination, defying the odds. But it does just fine. It sways in the wind instead of resisting it. At the summit of Mount Rose, there are spectacular 360-degree views over to Lake Tahoe and into the mountains of South Shore. That blue lake in the background, you can see the mountains behind it. That's Tahoe. Our last hike, from Woods Lake to Winnemucca and Round Top Lakes, begins a few miles west of Carson Pass off Highway 88 in South Tahoe. The trail begins in a forest of conifers and aspens with large boulders, which are fun for little ones. That cute little boy was crawling all over those rocks the day I walked by. You'll find Jacob's Ladder at the base of the conifers, right near where the little guy is climbing. It has those nodding blue flowers and tiny white anthers offering themselves to pollinators. And only about 1/2 mile from the trailhead, you'll enter this huge bowl of magnificent wildflower gardens. It's backdropped by powerful Round Top Mountain, who overlooks this slope like a welcoming, beneficent being. A cascading creek flows through the bowl with great delight, nourishing lush gardens of 5 feet tall, large-leaf lupines, as you see here in this picture, which bloom from July through August. Lupin flowers develop their unusual shape as they co-evolved with bees over millions of years. Female bees are the pollinators, and they're attracted to the white banner, which you see the white banner, that's called a banner petal on the back of the flower, and it's white with those little black dots. Bees are attracted to contrasting colors. They've learned that if there are contrasting colors, they can follow those colors, or the spots or little fuzzy hairs, into where the nectar is. You'll notice that the flowers at the bottom have turned to a reddish purple color. Now, what has happened is the flowers at the top are fresh because they haven't been pollinated. But the flowers below have turned to that color. Now there's no longer a contrast. So the bees ignore the pollinated flowers and go up and fly into the unpollinated flowers. It's a pretty clever adaptation. And when I say clever, I mean that. Later on, we'll talk about plant intelligence. So what happens is the bee flies into the banner, carries pollen gathered from another lupin. She lands on the tip of the wing petals that are just below the banner, exerting just enough pressure to pop up the hidden reproductive parts. The female stigma is exposed and dusted with the pollen from the previous lupin. She then picks up more pollen from this flower, stuffs it into the hairy receptacles on her hind legs, like in the picture on the right, and flies off and pollinates another lupin. This photo shows a bee licking up nectar with her tongue, though it isn't a lupin, which she then moves into her special nectar-collecting stomach. As she flies back to the hive, enzymes and proteins in her nectar stomach break down the complex sugars to later produce honey. If she gets a little hungry on the way home, she can consume a bit of nectar from her nectar stomach. So the amount of pollen and nectar that she carries can equal her body weight. Just imagine us carrying equal to our body weight back and forth for miles, multiple times each day. Yet these precious little bees do this over and over during their 6 to 7 week summer lifetime. And after that, they're worn out and they die. When she arrives at the hive, she regurgitates her sugars into younger bees, who process the sugar further into honey, which is then put into these hive cells that you can see and stored in there. Bees are amazing little beings, but then so are plants. Leafy plants with roots appeared on this earth around 370 million years ago. Homo sapiens evolved as a species only about 300 years ago. During these millions of years, plants have been evolving root tips that function like brains, with neurons, which are brain cells, and axons, which are brain cell transmitters, to create a consciousness crucial to their survival. Plants grace us with their beauty, and they photosynthesize to feed all of their lives, directly or indirectly. And scientists are now discovering how plants create complex social relationships and how they communicate with each other and with animals. They also breathe without lungs, hear without ears, nourish themselves without a mouth or stomach. They stand erect without a skeleton, and they make decisions based on what they remember from past experiences. Richard Carbon, a professor of etymology at UC Davis, has also found that our beautiful plants sense light, chemicals, mechanical stimulation, temperature, electricity, electromagnetic fields, and sound. They hear and speak using auditory signals through a complex sound-based language that exists in a more subtle sound spectrum than our own. Aristotle thought plants were limited by their stationary existence because he didn't have the science that we've used to discover more about plants, that they are actually in constant and lively discourse with other plants, soil fungi, and animals. Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher and mathematical genius who lived more than 2,400 years ago, is said to have explained, astonishing, everything is intelligent. For me, this makes hiking even more interesting. So from now on, if you pass a social gathering of, say, Mariposa Lilies and Paintbrush, you might wonder what they're saying to one another. You might wonder what they're saying about you. So be sure to stop for a few minutes and say hello. When you finally reach Winnemucca Lake at the elevation of 9,100 feet, you'll find white-bark pines that prefer very high elevations, often up to 10 and 11,000 feet. Their red male cones in that upper picture will help you to identify them. At this high elevation, some of the trees are pruned down to only 5 feet tall, but in other less wild and windy environments, they can be 12, 15 feet tall. These conifers are very primitive, and unlike other conifers, they did not evolve to open their female cones to release their seeds. Instead, they depend upon nutcrackers or other animals to break the seeds free from the cones. Nutcrackers gather and carry 50 or more seeds at a time in their pouches, which is right beneath their tongues. In one season, a nutcracker can collect up to 30,000 seeds and cache them in 10,000 locations over an area of 10 square miles. When they return later in the winter, these intelligent birds find the seed caches under the snow by having triangulated their locations when they buried them in the summer. Pretty extraordinary, huh? As we continue along the trail, you'll find Cassiopeia growing among the rocks. John Muir searched for this plant for a long time in Yosemite until he finally found it, after which he wrote, "I met Cassiopeia growing in the fringes among the battered rocks. Her blossoms had faded long ago, but they were still clinging with happy memories to to the evergreen sprays, meaning the leaves, and still so beautiful as to thrill every fiber of one's being. No evangel among all the mountain plants speaks nature's love more plainly than Cassiopeia. After a gradual uphill climb, Round Top Lake is reached. It's a peaceful place to linger, to look up at the 10,000-foot mountains at the lake's edge, which are called the Three Sisters. The flowers that you're seeing on this slope are the showy polemoniums that are cascading down the easy slope. It's a very easy slope to climb up. And then you'll also see the little Alpine Buttercups. They snuggle in the rocks for protection from the wind. This is very high elevation, so they have to snuggle down too. Buttercups are named for their shiny, butter yellow colored petals. The white starch grains under the yellow pigment reflect the sunlight, and that creates that shiny look that you see. Indians gathered their seeds and roasted them for consumption, just like we roast popcorn. Tucked in the rocks of the Three Sisters, you might just find a short-tailed weasel curiously looking out at you, like this little guy. It's only 7-12 inches long, including its tail, and it's a fierce little carnivore. It consumes mice and voles and lives through the winter on seeds and dried grasses that it gathered in the summer and fall. It makes its home at these high elevations all winter long, and as winter approaches and the days shorten, its brown fur gradually falls out and white fur comes in. And except for a little dense black hairs at the very tip of its tail. And I don't know what that is, but I wonder if it helps them locate each other when they're out in the snow playing or maybe looking for more food. You may also find this spectacular sugar stick, which grows 6 to 12 inches tall in forest habitats. And since sugar sticks lack green leaves, they can't photosynthesize, just like the snow plants and the orchids. Instead, they live by absorbing carbon and other nutrients from the soil fungi that coat their roots, just like the orchids and other plants that we talked about do. This western pasque flower is uncommon at Tahoe, so it was exciting to find on this hike. It's an early bloomer in rocky, damp habitats right near the lake. It sweetly rises out of the soil soon after the snow melts. That's in that picture on the left. They look like little clusters. And the picture in the middle shows them in full bloom. They're about 12 inches tall, 8 to 12. And then the flower on the right are the seed pods. And they look like little hairy Muppet heads from Sesame Street. But those are the little furry parts that carry the seed, which is at the base, away in the wind to plant a new plant. It's common in the high country, too, to see a marmot peacefully enjoying the view. And one time, as I was quietly walking along the trail in the late afternoon light, I came upon this little marmot standing upright in a Zen pose, blissfully basking in the warmth of the late afternoon sunlight. I grabbed my camera and took a quick shot before he or she realized I was there and ran off. When we're quiet and very present along the trail, we see more and we experience unexpected delights like this. So when you're out hiking at Tahoe this summer, take time to wander off the trail by yourself to a special place where you can be alone and quiet and sink into the beauty surrounding you. In times like this, we aren't just looking at flowers, but rather seeing deeply into them with our hearts, to experience their beauty and the sacredness of nature, which can awaken us to our own better selves. So let's take some quiet time now for ourselves without any words or plant names, just enjoy the exquisite beauty of our Sierra wildflowers. slowing down and taking time to really see and appreciate flowers can enrich you with wonderment and delight. I wonder how such perfect beauty could have ever been created through evolution, or as Buddha so beautifully expressed more than 2,000 years ago. If we could see the miracle of a single flower clearly, our whole life would change.